In the chaotic media landscape that followed the 1996 murder of JonBenet Ramsey, few local voices left as many fingerprints on the narrative as Frank Coffman, a Boulder-based freelance journalist and artist. Coffman became an unlikely but persistent figure in the unfolding drama, weaving himself into media critiques, legal tangents, and even direct physical encounters with members of the Ramsey circle. While not an official investigator or mainstream reporter, his access, opinions, and actions positioned him as both witness and agitator, someone who spoke into the void where formal clarity so often failed to materialize. The following report traces Coffman's presence in the case and considers how his actions, alongside those of other central figures, shaped the public perception of the Ramsey investigation. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Frank Coffman first emerged in the reporting not as a primary source but as a voice of local critique. His commentary on figures like Shapiro, a freelance reporter for the Globe, reflected Coffman's disdain for tabloid culture and his concern that certain journalists were inserting themselves too deeply into the story. Shapiro, who famously rented an apartment near JonBenet's older half-brother and attended the Ramseys church in search of leads, was described by Coffman as having crossed the line between journalism and personal obsession. He couldn't distinguish from being a reporter and being a sort of investigator trying to solve the case himself, Coffman stated. His remarks didn't absolve Shapiro but framed him as emblematic and of a broader media problem: the conflation of the entertainment with journalism and access with truth. Coffman also defended those adjacent to the Ramseys who were drawn into suspicion. When police questioned a woman who had taken art classes with Patsy Ramsey, hoping to learn whether the materials used in JonBenet's death were familiar to her, Coffman stepped in to clarify. He noted that the woman had no memory of Patsy using nylon cord or duct tape for artistic purposes, and argued that even if her materials were used, it did not necessarily implicate her. This subtle but consistent stance of Coffman's to follow a line of inquiry without necessarily endorsing its conclusions characterizes much of his coverage. Before we move forward, though, I'd like to say a special thank you to Trace the Ace for supporting the channel. Trace, thank you so much. Sending you a huge, big hug, big squeeze. Thank you so much. Additionally, I'd like to give a great big thank you to Miss Elizabeth 0424. Elizabeth, thank you so much for supporting the channel. You and Trace really made my day, and thank you to all the supporters out there. Thank you so much, Miss Elizabeth. Sending you a huge hug. To get an even better sense of who Frank Coffman is, here's a video posted by the Daily Camera.
It's going to be very busy, and I don't have much time. I don't take any days off during September and October. I just work basically all day, every day, and then I have a more leisurely life after that. I just have to accept that, So to be a mask, to be a costume maker, you have to make masks. You have to be a sculptor, because I had to sculpt all of this stuff out of clay originally, and you have to be an airbrush artist, and you have to be a seamster, which is a male seamstress. So you have to be a sculptor, an airbrush artist, and a sewer, a seamster, and you have to want to do this kind of strange work. So I guess that's why there's so few people who do it. How many people meet all of those requirements? Some people, have you got any friendlier ones? And I guess I could, make friendlier ones with smiles on their faces or something, if I had the time. But at present, I don't have that. Some people want gorillas that have a smile more on their face. Maybe if I have time, I'll make is he that unfriendly? I try to make him kind of in between, not too fierce, not too friendly. Something you might see in a zoo. I actually, this mask, a friend of mine brought it to the zoo and put it on in front of the girls, and they went crazy over it. They recognized it as one of their own.
To give a little bit more background of Frank Coffman, he is a costume maker of Halloween costumes. First started off by making masks and then moving into suits. And so the Daily Camera writes about him and says, when he has free time, he collects artwork, studies film and follows the news closely. He used to be a contributing columnist for the Colorado Daily and became something of a civilian detective investigating the infamous JonBenet Ramsey case, mining clues and working closely with the police. His contributions to that case are chronicled in the sentimental JonBenet book, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. A photo Coffman took years ago of JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, was once published in the New York Times. So we can kind of see that Coffman is a jack of all trades. In terms of the intruder theory and Mary Keenan, Coffman's relationship with Boulder District Attorney Mary Keenan, later Mary Lacey, offers one of the clearest illustrations of his behind-the-scenes involvement in shaping how key figures thought about the case. A volunteer on her 2000 campaign for DA, Coffman had a chance encounter with Keenan at a grocery store where she confided in him that she did not believe the Ramseys fit the psychological profile of child murderers. Her support for the intruder theory dated back as early as 1998 and was heavily centered on Bill McReynolds, a former journalism professor who had played Santa Claus at the Ramsey Christmas party. Keenan's belief in their innocence, according to Coffman, stemmed from her background as a victim's advocate. She viewed Patsy as a woman more likely to be victimized than culpable. This division within the DA's office became pronounced. Former Detective Steve Thomas wrote that Alex Hunter believed Patsy was involved, while Keenan had a fundamentally different interpretation, grounded more in effective judgments and perceived character than forensics. Coffman's casual conversation with her, later quoted in the press, captured his rift at the time when the public narrative was still largely hostile toward the Ramseys. Additionally, Coffman has been involved in some conversations surrounding the dormant JonBenet Ramsey Foundation. In 1997, John and Patsy Ramsey announced the formation of the JonBenet Ramsey Children's Foundation. But by 1999, no discernible activity or donations had reached local children's advocacy groups, and IRS records remained inaccessible. Coffman, ever blunt, compared the foundation to a hypothetical O.J. Simpson battered women's shelter or a Bill Clinton school for wayward girls, a scathing indictment of what he saw as performative charity in the face of unresolved suspicion. Local nonprofit leaders confirmed they had never received support from the Ramseys Foundation and had no knowledge of its activity. Coffman's comments here go beyond media critique to question how the couple navigated their public rehabilitation. Were their philanthropic gestures sincere or strategically hollow? In an environment where image was everything, Coffman was unafraid to puncture the sheen. Other ways that Coffman was embedded in the media spectacle, as the case dragged into the late 1990s with the grand jury process unfolding at a glacial pace, the media descended on Boulder with obsessive intensity. Coffman was there for the tedium as well as the tension. He described watching Alex Hunter deliver a numbing historical lecture on grand juries while journalists vied for courtroom seats. It's a tribute to the case, Coffman quipped, that something so boring would attract so many people. This comment, like many of Coffman's remarks, captured the surreal atmosphere around the Ramsey case. Everyone wanted a scoop, even when there was no story. Everyone had a theory, even when the facts were few. Coffman lived in that absurdity, observing the pageantry while occasionally becoming part of it. Then there are gatekeeping narrative controls and the Ramsey Shield. Frank Coffman's experiences illustrate the complex dance with media access, law enforcement discretion, and public image. Figures like Mary Keenan offered the Ramseys a form of institutional shelter, interpreting them through a psychological lens that left little room for culpability. Keenan's empathy-driven framework as recounted by Coffman, helped establish the intruder theory as a viable narrative even as other officials pushed for an indictment closer to home, the same as Lou Smith in terms of the intruder theory. Simultaneously, characters like Mike Bynum functioned as fixers and handlers, whether diffusing physical confrontations or shielding the Ramseys from unwanted attention. They helped maintain the firewall between the family and a relentless media. But the press was never monolithic. Tabloid reporters and mainstream journalists and freelancers like Coffman often clashed not just with their subjects, but with one another. Coffman's presence, analytical but emotionally invested, offers a glimpse into how outsiders tried to fill the vacuum left by official silence. This overlapping mesh of sympathizers, protectors, and critics influenced how the public processed the case. The absence of resolution made space for impression management. In that space, Coffman raised uncomfortable questions, got too close for comfort, and reminded everyone that even watchdogs can become targets. I now like to turn my attention to probably one of the funniest parts of this analysis, and that's the physical altercation with John Ramsey. The incident that most dramatically underscores Coffman's proximity to the emotional core of the case occurred on a winter night in December of 1998. Acting on a tip that John Ramsey was visiting the soon-to-open Pasta J's restaurant, owned by his friend and former business partner Jay Alowski, Coffman grabbed his camera and approached. When Ramsey exited the restaurant with his son John Andrew and attorney Mike Bynum, Coffman began taking photographs. What happened next diverged sharply from John Ramsey's composed public persona. Coffman reported that Ramsey charged at him like a bull seeing a red flag, grabbed his arm and jacket, and attempted to bring him down. It took Bynum's intervention to de-escalate the situation. This altercation marked a moment when media coverage turned physical, and Coffman became not just a chronicler of tension, but a participant. His reflection on the incident hinted at the accumulating pressure on the Ramsey family, but also at the volatility that could erupt when their carefully managed image was disrupted. As reported in the Rocky Mountain News on December 15th of 1998, the headline of the article reads, "Photographer says Ramsey grabbed him. Freelance journalist cites very rough treatment." The article goes on to state that a freelance journalist says he was roughed up by John Ramsey when he snapped a picture of him Friday night. I thought, oh my gosh, we're seeing a whole nother side to the meek, mild John Ramsey people talk about, said Frank Coffman. He was very rough. He tried to manhandle me, no question about that. Neither Ramsey or his attorney could be reached for comment. Coffman, 50, said he was phoned at about 11 p.m. Friday by a friend who knows of his interest in the JonBenet Ramsey case. That friend told him that John Ramsey, the girl's father, was in downtown Boulder. Ramsey was with his 22-year-old son, John Andrew Ramsey, and several other people at a restaurant on Pearl Street. The eatery is being remodeled by Ramsey's friend, Boulder restaurateur Jay Alowski. Coffman grabbed his camera and walked 1 block from his apartment to a building being converted into a new Pasta J's restaurant. Ramsey, 55, has been a business partner of Alowski in the past. If John Ramsey wants to come over to my neighborhood, I'll take a picture of him anytime, Coffman said. He said his confrontation began when Ramsey and others emerged from the restaurant at the corner of 10th and Pearl Street. From 15 feet away, I start to take a picture, but before I can, he shouts, and he runs right at me full speed, like a bull seeing a red flag, said Coffman. Coffman said Ramsey grabbed him. He started tussling with me, pulling on my jacket and pulling my arm. He had both hands on me, and he looked like he was going to take me down. It was at this point, Coffman said, that a man he recognized as Mike Bynum, an attorney and Ramsey family friend, intervened by saying, "Don't, John. It's not worth it." Coffman said John Ramsey then proceeded to a nearby parked car as Coffman went ahead and took their photos. Bynum's law office on Monday referred calls about the episode to Ramsey attorney Hal Haddon. Haddon could not be reached for comment. John Ramsey and his wife Patsy are suspects in the ongoing grand jury probe into the murder of a 6-year-old JonBenet. She was found in her basement on December 26, 1996. They vow they are innocent. End of article. I figure I've made you wait long enough. So here are some of the photos that Frank Coffman took the night of in December of 1998. Here's John Andrew, and here's John walking. And here's a supposed picture of John when he was sent over the edge. We're always thankful to Candy Rose for her documentation of the events in the Ramsey case. And here on Candy Rose's site, you have the chain of events in 1998, specifically 12/12 of 1998, the Boulder News Forum thread, Ramsey wrestles with photographer. And it reads, a photographer was seen wrestling with John Ramsey last night in front of the new Pasta J's. With him was Mike Bynum and John Andrew. It seems this photographer was setting up to click as they came out of Pasta's, and John saw him. He then violently lunged toward the poor shutterbug and grabbed his jacket and started a tussle. The look in Ramsey's eyes were enough to send even the toughest back into the shadows. The look in Ramsey's eyes were enough to send even the toughest back into the shadows. But this guy, being determined, continued to click away. Bynum was heard yelling something to John, but the observer couldn't make it out. This photographer exchanged heated words with the three. It must have been some tabloid guy. I guess we'll find out soon enough. Can't wait to hear firsthand what it was about. I'm sure it's all over the local news by now. So much for hearing how passive JR is. We all knew about JA and Pasta having tempers, but John, my big question out of all of this has to be, what were they all doing in Pasta's? Now we know that at least Pasta J had ran up on some engineers who he thought were reporters, and he went after them, and he had to be booked into the local jail for just a little bit before he was released, because things got pretty nasty. And I'm not really sure about anything involving John Andrew, so I don't know. I'm just taking their word for it here. But in some of the forums, if you know, some of you aren't familiar with Frank Coffman, in the forums, his name he went by Mask Man, obviously because he makes Halloween masks. So it goes on to say, another person says, John Ramsey acted like Sean Penn last night around 11 p.m. last night, December 11th. John Ramsey physically attacked a photographer at the corner of 10th and Pearl in Boulder, Colorado, as the photographer tried to snap a picture of him. Ramsey yelled, "You fatherless person," and charged at the photographer. Ramsey grabbed the man's jacket, tussled with him, and seemed ready to tear him to pieces until Mike Bynum intervened, saying, "Don't, John, it's not worth it." Ramsey suddenly backed off just before he got into a serious street brawl. No blood was shed, but Ramsey committed an assault. Message for the Daily Camera. Contact Bynum. He witnessed the whole thing. Go get your story, Matt. Message to John. Save your rage for the intruder. You know, the one you're not angry with, as you said on CNN. It's too bad you're not as furious at the killer. A very telling episode. So much for the myth of the meek, gentle John Ramsey. He unmasked himself on Pearl Street in Boulder last night. It is quite funny that John almost seems like it's like John wants to be in. It's almost as if John wants to be the hero in this story so bad that he cusses like a movie villain. That's what it seems like. John cusses like a movie villain, and he said, like, the way that he forms sentences and the places that he puts emphasis on the places that he puts emphasis during situations and whatnot is it's kind of like somebody in a movie that is extremely dramatic. Let me move forward here. Frank Coffman had an opportunity to talk to Peter Boyles on his show, and they kind of go into it. And so Peter says, we have breaking Ramsey news. JR was in Boulder walking out, and JR went after him, or walking out of Pasta J's Saturday night along with JR and Bynum. A photographer took his picture, and JR went after him. What does this prove? It proves that JR has a violent temper, quoting those that said he never lost his temper with the kids. Says he'll be talking to someone with very good information about this at 7:30. So the transcript is this. Peter says, we have breaking Ramsey news. JR was in Boulder walking out of Pasta J Saturday night along with JR and Bynum. A photographer took his picture, and John Ramsey went after him. What does this prove? It proves that John Ramsey has a violent temper, quoting those that said he never lost his temper. Peter says, the most significant thing to the impeachment is the JBR murder. With us is Frank Coffman. Thank you for doing this. Tell us the story of Friday night. Frank says, I got word that John Ramsey was at the 10th and Pearl location, had my camera. When he walked out the door, I attempted to take his picture, but before I could do that, he charged at me, snarling and yelled, fatherless person. I thought he was going to throw me around. Bynum yelled, don't do it, John. It's not worth it. I did not hit him or strike back at him, but he was getting pretty rough. Peter says, have you been to the police about this? And Frank says, no. Are you going to? I'm thinking about it, Frank says. He's closing Pasta J's in Boulder and moving to the 10th and Pearl. Now, who else do you think is invested in the restaurant? Peter says. Frank says, we heard Bynum, and I assume Ramsey has some interest in it. Peter says, they're all co-signatures on his loan in Vegas. We heard that Bynum was the first call that he made, that was made. And so Frank says, I don't know. Peter says, when Bynum was on the house tour, he was never identified as an attorney or business associate. Wasn't Bynum the consortium who had control over the sale of the house? Frank says, yes, they didn't get market value out of it. And then Peter says, yes, I understand they lost about $200,000. About John Ramsey's anger, the relatives take on that disc jockey voice, that he never raised his voice even with his children. Frank says, it is odd that he could be so unangry about the murder of his daughter and yet be so violently angry with me. How far away were you from him were you? And Frank says, probably 15 feet. JR was there. JR is known to have a violent temper. I knew there might be trouble trying to take a picture, but I didn't think it would be JR. There's another time where Glenn Stein and JR chased a photographer, but this one is the most extreme I've heard of. He can get raging angry. It was like showing a red cape to a bull. He grabbed my arm, my jacket, like he was trying to throw me down. I didn't try to fight him. The minute Bynum yelled at him, he immediately backed off. Peter Boyle says, it's Boulder. It's okay. My final question is, have you considered reporting this to the police? And Frank says, I guess so. I'm not after any legal rambling. Peter says, is Patsy in town? And then Frank says, I don't know. Maybe JR was just there visiting with JAR. I guess this is funny to me because I can imagine John clenching his jaws as he talks about, in the same manner that he talks about getting JonBenet back and saying, I got to get her back, kind of clenching his jaws and being very determined. But, you know, this guy who's bending down on one knee trying to take a picture, and then John seems to be coolly walking out and calmly collected, almost as if he's unbothered and not paying attention. And then all of a sudden, wham, John Ramsey is in your face trying to attack you. So the question is, how do we go from people passing you on the sidewalk? John is on the other side of John Andrew, and this man is technically safe right now. He's like probably not in any danger. But out of nowhere, we get here. Like, how did we get here? How is John Ramsey now in your face? And John Andrew is looking like this is a normal thing. Like, this is no problem. Like, no one's trying to attack anything. I guess that's probably the most disturbing thing, is that John is trying to attack Frank, But John Andrew, it seems to think that this is normal behavior. He's standing there with his hands in his pockets, it looks like. One forum writer kind of chimed in and said, while I don't believe that incident is any indication that John may have had anything to do with JonBenet, I do think it's another example of Ramsey arrogance. The Ramseys, like many movie stars, seem to want to use the media when it serves their purposes and attack it when it doesn't. I don't think this case would have engendered nearly the amount and duration of publicity it has had the Ramseys not chosen to appear on CNN. Correct. We said the same thing. If you would have just let it go, then you probably wouldn't have been in the position that you're in. But for some strange and odd reason, you felt like you needed to go on CNN in Atlanta, of all places, to a big network that probably would have allowed this to just be a local story and that's it. You went to people who probably didn't know anything about this and basically told on yourself. And that's nobody's fault except yours. The user goes on to say, it's no crime to take photos of a person walking down a public street. It isn't an invasion of privacy either, since it wasn't a private activity Ramsey and his party were engaged in. One major life lesson the Ramseys may gain from this terrible time is that they have no special privilege in the public forum. And I would say that's right. You can't just go around attacking people, jumping in people's face, jumping on people's back. I mean, I guess Kanye West doesn't care about that, but I guess everybody has a little bit of Kanye West in them. So another place in the forum, posted in the Web Sleuths forum, I guess, was posted in Boulder Weekly, kind of gives a little bit more detail. It says, it's not a mugshot, Mr. Ramsey. For an aspiring paparazzo in Boulder, opportunities are rare. So when Frank Coffman got a call Saturday from a friend saying she'd spotted John Ramsey in a restaurant at 10th and Pearl, he grabbed his camera and raced to the scene. Coffman, who favors the title writer-researcher over paparazzo, has been fascinated with the JonBenet Ramsey case ever since her body was found. He's made an avocation of hanging around the fringes of the case, collecting information, asking questions, talking to neighbors in hopes of writing a book or a long magazine article. Along the way, he sells little bits of what he finds. A good picture of Boulder's most famous father, Coffman figured, could be for some bucks from the tabloids. When Coffman arrived, he found Ramsey's son, John Andrew, standing guard, glaring out the window. That is so weird. Why are you glaring out the window? He waited outside until the party exited. As he approached, camera in hand, the senior Ramsey yelled, "You fatherless person," and lunged at him. He grabbed me and started tearing at my clothes. Like, what kind of act, what are you doing with your hands to where you lunge at somebody and you go to tear their clothes off? Like, I don't think at that point you're trying to fight anyone. You're just trying to dismantle them. You're trying to, if you lunge at somebody and you don't even try to swing, you just merely try to start ripping their shirt, then I'm not sure if I'm not sure if you're a maniac or if you just don't know how to fight, but the unction to fight has hit you, and so you don't know what to do with that energy, and so you just do what comes to mind. It's like maybe that person who's watched, karate movies, but doesn't actually know karate. And so when they get the unction to do karate, they realize in that moment that they can't really do karate. So they just go with, but they still have to intimidate you. Like, I still have to intimidate you somehow. And so John lunges and just hangs onto the guy's shirt, and the guy, Coffman not really knowing what to do, just kind of takes it. And because he's not really the fighting type. And so, you know what? And I'll be honest with you, that kind of seems like, it almost seems as if there's an element of bully behavior there. Like when you see a paparazzi just kind of down taking pictures to where you just kind of attack them, they're in no position to, react to anything that you do. So, okay, it's crazy. And so just the questionable guarding the, I can understand you guarding the door, but glaring out of the window, I'm going to tell you right now, I get a creepy visual on that one. That image is just creepy to me. That's just it. That gives me the creeps. I'm not going to lie to you. So fortunately, though, I specifically, so he lunged at me, he grabbed me and started tearing at my clothes, Coffman recalled. I specifically remember him grabbing my arm. He was just snarling and enraged. Fortunately, though, it's hard to tell who for, Coffman or Ramsey. A friend of the Ramseys interceded, telling him, no, John, it's not worth it. Ramsey backed off and turned the other way. Coffman followed, taking pictures. He got a good one of John and John Andrew, which he's titled Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and another Ramsey sliding into his car. Nice camera, Ramsey told Coffman as he opened the car door. I said, you know, you shouldn't attack people. It's against the law, Coffman recalled. He seemed to have a hint of a grim smile on his face when I said that. For his part, Coffman feels no guilt. I wouldn't harass him if I didn't suspect he had knowledge of a specific crime, said Coffman, who wouldn't go so far as to say Ramsey is guilty. The New York Times requested copies of the photos on Tuesday, and the incident won Coffman a spot on the Peter Boyles show Monday morning. Where is this nonviolent John Ramsey we heard about? Asked Boyles. Here's a man who on CNN says he's not angry at the person who did this to JonBenet, but he's angry at a photographer. What is that about? Attorneys representing Ramsey did not return phone calls seeking comment on the incident. That's what I'm saying. John Andrew and John and Patsy, they all forgive. You know, they all forgive. And you know what's funny though too? What we should ask. I don't think I've heard anybody ask it. They all said, you know what? We want to forgive this guy as mad as we are. We want to forgive this guy. You know what? Somebody should ask. Somebody should ask if, you know, and look, I'm not trying to be messy, but I'm just saying I would like to understand or hear his perspective on this. Somebody should ask Burke. His initial Dr. Phil should have asked Burke when he had the chance, you know, what would you say if you could to the person that did this to your sister? Like, are you at the place now that you can forgive, you know, this person for doing this to your sister? I think that question should be asked. So because we can just have that on record to see how Burke feels about this individual doing this to JonBenet. I think that would make a lot of sense. I don't think that question has been asked. I think it's a very reasonable question because everybody else was asked a question. And so they said, you know what, we would forgive. You know, hey, John said there were times where said, hey, man, put me in the room with this guy and just, you know, if you put me in the room with this guy and you lock it, you know, that guy may never make it out, you know. But then I guess later on he says, you know what, I'm not angry. It's just, so it's kind of weird. It's a mixed message. But here he's taking, like, you know, physicality to the next level and actually going after photographers. Like, just the way they do some of these photographers, that they think it's funny, it's sneaky. You guys remember that we talked about the time in their book, one of their books, to where they were basically on the run with Susan Stein, and they had dropped their car off at I think they were in Atlanta, and they had dropped one of the cars off at their parents' house, and they really thought they had dodged the paparazzi, is what they thought they had done. But the paparazzi actually, you know, tracked them to the house, to the parents' house, where they changed the car out and got into another car. But the paparazzi was too smart and followed them. And then they noticed that in traffic they were being tailed. And so Susan Stein was at a light, I guess, and she hit a U-turn real quick, or she, you know, blasted off in traffic real quick, and then hit a U-turn and ducked off somewhere into some neighborhood to kind of get away. And they kind of all laughed about it and stuff like that. But these people, it's funny. And even another example where John said that or Patsy and John were talking about this point in which they were on a yacht, a picture in which they were on a yacht, and they were talking about weapons, and they were kind of hoisting one in the air and playing around with one just before the paparazzi got there. And the paparazzi, all they saw was, you know, John and Patsy and Glenn and Susan enjoying a glass of wine. But Patsy was saying, had they been there earlier, they would have saw, you know, John and Susan having a conversation about this weapon. And I don't know why Patsy felt the need to sort of say that. I don't know why she would sort of implicate herself in that kind of thing, or her friends, because that definitely does, it's definitely not a good look for your behavior. It's really not. Just kind of playing around with a weapon like that and kind of saying, oh, you know, if I saw these people in the trees, then I would do this to them with this here item. I don't know why you would tell people that. You should probably have just kept that to yourself. Okay, so next, in an article with or something by Catherine Rossman, said the Ramseys are fair game. Says Time is by no means the mainstream media organization. Time is by no means the only mainstream media organization that has looked to those who employ tabloid tactics to get the goods. Outlets such as Dateline, NBC, and the New York Times have turned to a Boulder gadfly named Frank Coffman to keep them competitive in their JonBenet coverage. Coffman, 52, is something of a small town crier in the saga, a resident of Boulder for more than 20 years. He once lived a quiet life making Halloween masks and writing occasional columns for a Boulder weekly newspaper. But that was before his town's serenity was rocked by the murder of a little girl. As an accident of proximity, Coffman says he became entangled in the case. On December 11th of 1998, in his downtown Boulder apartment, which looks like a graduate student's crash pad, Coffman's phone rang. John Ramsey's standing on a street corner by your apartment right now, cried the caller. Coffman took the cue. He snatched the camera and dashed out the door. Coffman saw Ramsey standing on the street corner with his son, a friend and one of Ramsey's lawyers. With his heart pounding, Coffman raised his camera, aimed, and fired. Ramsey wasn't pleased to see Coffman with his camera hoisted. He attacked me, Coffman says, claiming that Ramsey lunged at him and grabbed his jacket before one of Ramsey's attorneys, Michael Bynum, stopped the potential brawl. Bynum did not return phone calls seeking comment. I was not stalking him, Coffman says without being asked. Still, he adds, it's kind of weird to take a picture of somebody like that. I wouldn't do it to anybody else, but John and Patsy Ramsey are fair game. Despite the scuffle, Coffman snapped a few shots, though the camera's flash didn't go off for the one picture that captured Ramsey allegedly lunging at Coffman. If that flash had gone off, that would have been a fabulous picture, says Coffman. It would have made him look so guilty, because people would have said, aha, here he is, the killer. Coffman purrs, adding, and I don't know that Ramsey did that to anybody. But whether Ramsey did or not, anyone matters little when you got an exclusive picture. Coffman says the incident surrounding his photography was reported in an internet chat room, and that once the word was out that he had a few photos of John Ramsey, his phone was ringing like a car alarm in New York City. The New York Times called me, he says. I didn't try to sell it, but they said, look, we want to buy this. We want to publish it. So I said, okay, why not? The Times ran one of Coffman's pictures on December 16th of 1998, along with an item that described the alleged tussle with Ramsey. Coffman says he made about $150 from the sale of the photo, in addition to getting work from the Times. Coffman says he has peeped through the windows of the Ramseys' former home in Boulder, taken photos and sold them to Schiller's movie production team. The photos helped the producers properly recreate the crime scene. That the Times considers it newsworthy that a stalker-razzi photographer claims to have had his collar grabbed by John Ramsey indicates how far even the most legitimate of news outlets have gone for a JonBenet story. Asked about the paparazzi-like photo, Times deputy picture editor Mike Smith said, we don't encourage or look for that kind of work. Coffman says he is not a profiteer seeking to make hard cash off the death of a kid. I never tried to make money on the Ramsey case, says Coffman. I've never asked anyone to send me money. They just spontaneously, all these people who were so desperate to get information and photographers and whatever on the Ramsey case. Coffman admits that he now accepts retainers from various media outlets in case he finds himself in possession of information they want, but won't say which outlets. I'd rather retain my freelance independent status, he reasons. Okay, and the chain of events in 2001 is kind of where I'll bring this to a close. And this is kind of a back and forth now between him and Jameson. Now, you guys know Jameson from The Death of Innocence, and Jameson is Sue Bennett. And this is a person that supposedly was brought to the Ramseys by Susan Stein. Susan Stein would just get up in the morning and just go, look on television, and she found out that, I think Jim Douglas was the FBI profiler was available, and so she recommended that John and Patsy get on that and have him come be a profiler for their team, to have a FBI expert on their team. And she said, I saw this woman in the forum, her name is Sue Bennett. You guys should probably talk to her. She's, pretty good. And then, John said he took a look at some of her stuff on the forums. John was acting like he didn't know anything about the internet. He didn't know how it worked. It was a whole new world for him. And he said, but we took a look at it, and her stuff seemed mostly accurate, as if John was sort of standoffish in the process of knowing this woman, and that this woman just basically, as you might call it, serendipitously just kind of happens upon this woman in the chats, and it's like, hey, look at this woman who's doing God's work for you guys, and so Susan Stein is like, hey, you should meet her. And and then they did. She came down, and John and Patsy met her, and weirdly, and John acts like, in the book, he acts like he just, she was just a normal person. They got to meet her, but then later on, he acts like he regretted it, and, doesn't know what her aim was. And even though he put her name in the book and basically told everybody her website so people could go find her, and allowed her to be essentially the lead person, what it feels like or what it seems like, just kind of gave her that clout that she needs to be the lead person, as the Ramsey apologist. Is the kind of clout that she got off of this. So that's who Jameson is. Sue Bennett has had an opportunity to meet the Ramseys, and I've looked at some of Sue's stuff, and yeah, she definitely is a huge apologist. So she goes on to say, offensive post to masked man is what that means. And like we said, masked man is the name for Frank Coffman. So she says, I posted this to masked man on Web Sleuths. It will be deleted, I am sure, but I want to post it here so no one can twist the words and say I said something I didn't. It is nasty. Don't read it if you're not prepared. She said, how many hours a day do you think of me? Am I there in your dreams? Geez, Frank, get over it. You lost something, and attacking me isn't going to get it back. You have a place in the story, so quit your belly aching. You were one of the first to publicly encourage hate against John by making up the posters and posting them all over the mall. Golly, man. You wrote some articles on the case. Remember those days when you were writing for the Boulder Weekly? Then you went a bit over the top. In my opinion, protecting Linda Hoffman Pugh at the expense of the paper's integrity. Wasn't that your last article? This is very Susan Stein-esque is what it is. Like, they try to take like little jabs at you, and this is like, this is what I'm saying. This is very Susan Stein-esque. They take shots at you, but it's like they throw rocks and hide their hand. They say a smart remark to you, and then they jump behind some sort of barrier. Like Susan Stein, when the cops showed up, she sent those emails, and then the cops showed up, and she was like, oh, I can't open the door. I'm not opening the door. You know what I mean? That's what this is. It's a very snarky attitude, if I should say. And so she goes on to say, oh, sorry, you didn't have that tabloid article you wrote for Craig. And your photo of John, remember that ambush shot? That was in the New York paper, and you got on Boyle's show with that one. You had your 15 minutes. You are in the books. Special thanks from Hodges and others. Okay, are you mad at me? And it seems like a little jealousy, right? Seems like you got a little jealousy toward me because I got 15 minutes of fame. I was making a little bit of money from doing what I do. You can't be mad at me from pushing media and getting paid for it, where you're just posting on forums, not doing anything with the information. I mean, if there's a Ramsey apologist newspaper, you could probably sell the fact that you are in cahoots with the Ramseys, that you've met the Ramseys and you've been close to them. You're a close friend now. You're a close confidant. And you could probably just say, hey, yeah, the Ramseys tell me things. If you want the scoop, ask me. I can get it from Susan, and Susan can get it from John and Patsy. That's all you had to do to make some money. So, and you could have taken some pictures with them and said, the Ramseys, John and Patsy, relaxing for the day. Someone would have probably bought it and you could have made money. But it sounds like you're mad at this guy for doing just that. Article goes on to say, if you aren't proud of the places you've been and the things that you've done, it isn't my fault. Act like a man. Look in the mirror and repeat this. I am a man. I am a man. I am a man. Basically, I think the message is grow the F up. Whoa. Okay, Sue. So this is where Frank shoots back in the forums and he says another big lie. And this is edited in November of 2000. Remember, I think it's November of 2001, I think. When was hers posted? Maybe August of 01. Yeah, August of 01. And he posts back in November, 4 months later. Another big lie. Every day, Susan Bennett tells more lies. Today, she is claiming that John Ramsey felt threatened when I tried to take his photo as he stood on a busy street in Boulder on December 11th of 1998. She claims that when John attacked me, he thought the camera was a weapon. What nonsense. Jameson, ever the apologist, says that I think John was acting out of fear and not anger. That is totally untrue. Jameson does not know how John acted. She wasn't there. Furthermore, in the news story about the episode that Jameson posted, she did. Oh, okay. So you posted a little bit on the news too, Jameson. She dishonestly deleted John's angry remark. She deleted his remark because she wants to conceal the fact that John acted aggressively, not defensively. Jameson wants to deceive by omitting a key fact. She even pretends to know what John was thinking at that moment. Jameson, Susan Bennett of Hickory, North Carolina, doesn't know squat. In reality, John Ramsey acted enraged, not scared. He yelled at me and then he charged at me. He didn't try to protect himself. He was angry. He didn't say, look out, it's a gun. No, he obviously knew it was a camera. When he saw me, I was standing only 15 feet away from him with my camera up to my eye. I snapped a photo of him as he approached within a few feet of me. He could plainly see that it was a camera. No one rushes toward a weapon, and a weapon isn't held like a camera. It doesn't make any sense to believe that John thought the camera was a weapon. His remark, you fatherless individual or fatherless person, showed his attitude. John Ramsey, and that's pretty on par with John Ramsey. You just look at some of the interviews. He gets the cusses for no reason. John Ramsey has a history of attacking photographers. I didn't know this part. He wrestled a photographer to the ground in the Atlanta airport. My God. On another occasion, he chased a photographer through a restaurant. So his behavior in December of 1998 was consistent with his past behavior. My goodness, John, you have got to get a hold of yourself. You chased a photographer through a restaurant? You are in the airport wrestling photographers to the ground? What are you doing? Take it easy, Tiger. This dude is tripping. John Ramsey has no right to attack photographers. He is committing an assault by doing so. I could have pressed the charges against him, but I didn't. His assault on me was interrupted when John's friend Mike Bynum, who was standing there, shouted, "John, don't do it. It's not worth it." Only then did John suddenly stop. Obviously, Bynum and John knew that I was snapping a photo. John acted like an enraged maniac. He was very belligerent. He wasn't scared at all. Later, he lied to Jameson about what happened. The episode makes me question John's honesty. This incident suggests that he will lie when it suits his purposes, for example, to make himself look better. And that's what I'm saying. Like, how involved with Jameson was John Ramsey himself? And that's what I'm saying. Like, how involved was John? Because I know John said that Susan Stein was the conduit, but was she really? Somebody goes on to say, I doubt that it's a photo of me, but Jameson does consider me to be a possible suspect in this JonBenet Ramsey case. Jameson, Susan Bennett, has been quietly planting the idea that I should be investigated. I don't know who this person is. Jeannie Lou. But she hasn't yet publicly named me as a suspect. There's no limit to her crazy ideas. Somebody else says, as you can tell, John Andrew has a hot temper. He's full of a lot of rage. In 1997, in a bar in Michigan, he threatened to crash a beer bottle over a reporter's head. JAR is known to be very volatile, as you can tell. He's full of hate. JAR didn't say anything to me when I took the photograph of his father December 11th of 1998. We didn't have any exchange of words. He just glared at me, but we didn't talk to each other. Seems to be the glare that Frank was talking about. While John is enraged, that's what I'm saying. Like, John Andrew is just standing there glaring. Coffman goes on to say, I read John Andrew's account on the Jameson forum. Okay, so John Andrew got involved in some of the forums, and so it looks like you guys. So and now you kind of take a step forward. These guys are not only just watching people be involved or post stories on these forums. They're actually getting involved in posting stuff themselves, getting involved in sort of talking about the narrative themselves. And this is probably consistent, right, with John Andrew's character, because there is a blogger or a sort of armchair investigator named Ashley Ray, and we talked about her for a little bit on this channel, who got retweet, whose Reddit post, I think it was, Reddit post or story or blog story got retweeted by John Andrew from his Twitter account, basically kind of calling her theory out as a lie and stuff like that. And so basically around the time the Netflix doc dropped. So this is kind of normal behavior for him. I know that much. So JAR doesn't say anything about his father thinking that I had a weapon that night. He says that he knew right away that I was snapping pictures. He says that his father went for the camera. No mention of his father mistaking my camera for a weapon. His account refutes Jameson's fantasy that John was afraid of a possible weapon. In fact, Mr. Ramsey never said, "Look out," or acted afraid in any way. He was aggressive, shouting, "You fatherless person," and lunging at me. I didn't charge or run toward Mr. Ramsey, nor did I run across the street. I simply walked slowly down the sidewalk, stopped about 15 feet from Mr. Ramsey. He didn't even notice me until I was standing there, ready to click a candid photo. Then, as my photo shows, John Ramsey came at me with his hand reaching out to grab me. He attacked me for simply snapping a photo. He wasn't scared, and he didn't think it was a weapon. The picture of Mr. Ramsey and JR walking down the street was taken later. Okay, so basically what he's saying is this photo was taken later. This was the photo taken later after the altercation. But this photo right here is kind of closer to the altercation, obviously, as we know. Okay, so this is one of the first initial responses of John. Frank goes on to say, John Ramsey is a public figure who wrote a book and who chooses to appear on TV shows. He is fair game for photographers. He should stop acting like Sean Penn, assaulting photographers. On other occasions, he has gone after other photographers in a similar manner. That's psycho behavior. John Ramsey had no good reason to attack me. He cursed at me, grabbed my jacket, and tried to throw me to the ground. The tussle could have become much more violent if Mike Bynum hadn't intervened. When Bynum told Ramsey to stop, Ramsey immediately stopped grappling with me. I didn't resist or hit back. I'm glad that Bynum intervened before the episode got really ugly. Jameson says that John Ramsey has no reason to lie about the episode. Yes, of course he does. He's fibbing about the episode because he doesn't want to admit that he acted like a crazy maniac. He wanted to brawl with me on the street. That's very strange behavior. I don't blame Mr. Ramsey for trying to deny what he did. It must be embarrassing to him. It's obvious what happened. As usual, Jameson, the faithful lackey and apologist, has told a false story that doesn't make any sense. JAR doesn't corroborate Jameson's fantasy. The truth is exactly as it's told. John Ramsey went berserk merely because I tried to take his picture. Period. That's hilarious to me. But anyways, that's the end of it. I just think that's quite funny. this, this case gets it's funnier and funnier because there's so much drama in this case. It's so juicy. Like you gotta like this. You gotta make a television show out of stuff like this, right? It's just hilarious. But anyways, let me know what you think. Let me know what was the funniest moment. Sorry, let me know what the funniest moment to you was about this entire thing. Let me know what you liked, what you thought was pretty cool information, and hope you're taking care of yourself. And until next time, take it easy.